if you were on the outside looking in, you'd be like, this guy's got a good life. But on the inside, I was dying. It was like this whole time I'd been trying to jam this square peg into a round hole. I was deeply dissatisfied with my career choices. It was fueling like a low-grade depression. I wasn't taking care of myself physically. I'd put on all this weight and terrible lifestyle habits. Is this the rest of my life?
That's Rich Roll. He's an ultra-endurance athlete, author of the best-selling book Finding Ultra, and with more than 25 million downloads, he's got one of the most popular podcasts in the world. In our conversation, we talk about the huge risks he took early on, how he deals with pain, and also how he became one of the 25 most fit men in the world. You're listening to The Ground Up Show, a podcast that inspires creatives to make meaningful content and pursue their passions. My name's Matt Diavella, and I'm a filmmaker best known for the Netflix documentary Minimalism. And I'm sitting down with creators to talk about their process, the lessons they've learned, and how to make an impact. Rich, thanks for being here. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So we were talking a little bit before the podcast started about some of the video stuff you're doing. It seems like you're making moves there, and you're starting to be really consistent with it. Have you always done video?
I wouldn't say that I've always done video. I've always been interested in video. In fact, long before any of the stuff that I do now, I was getting into filmmaking and writing. I wrote and directed a short film that did the festival circuit in 2005 and even won some awards.
No shit.
So, yeah, it was called Down Dog. It was a satire on the LA yoga scene. It's up on Vimeo. You can check it out. It's like a 22-minute short that I shot on 35 millimeter. With a full crew and the whole thing. So, and I did a summer intensive filmmaking program at NYU back in 1991 or 1992. So I've always been interested in film. I've PA'd on movies and things like that. I opened up a YouTube account, probably 2008, and started doing a little bit of stuff here and there, but never really fully invested in it. And then I took a stab at making a couple vlogs, over the last 2 years, and really enjoyed that. And I love editing and I love storytelling, but I just couldn't do it on my own. I just needed help because it was just overwhelming and it was eclipsing the other things that I was working on, which is why I brought on David. I've always been looking for a collaborative partner so that I could step into the video space in a meaningful way and do it sustainably.
So much of my time today is spent in editing. I'm wondering, I feel like I need to hire somebody because there's other stuff that needs to be done. Yeah. Like I'm trying to build a podcast. I'm trying to keep an audience engaged and keep them interested in what I'm making. Mm-hmm. And yes, you have to do the work, but I feel like it's not sustainable long-term to keep churning out these videos that take 8 to 10 hours to make.
But you're a filmmaker. Like this is what you do. Like you could justify that time investment, but I'm writing books and I'm doing all these other things. But I love the medium. Like I made this silly little video maybe a year and a half ago called Vegan on $25, where I just spent a day going to different markets and seeing what you could buy for $25. And I pulled an all-nighter to edit that thing. Like I literally stayed up all night. I haven't pulled an all-nighter in 10 or 15 years, and I came home at like 9 a.m. and my wife was like, what are you doing? And I was like, I got obsessed. I was like, every little cut, and that video has like 270,000 views. It's the most viewed thing that I've done on YouTube. So it's gratifying in that sense, but I'm like, I can't, this is not what this is not what I'm supposed to be doing.
How do you approach that perfectionism where I know sometimes I'll just get caught up on a video and it's like every single edit I'm like, all right, I'm probably spending way too much time looking at the details, but like sometimes it's that video that takes off, gets 200,000 views and it really has an impact. So it's like, how do you know when to justify putting in the time?
I don't know well. I don't do that well. I'm a perfectionist to a fault, which is a strength and also very much an Achilles heel. And I carry that into the podcasting that I do and the writing and everything that I do. And it makes me a bit of a control freak. And I think ultimately it caps my growth, So my journey has been about learning to focus on the things that I do best that other people can't do, and learning to let go and empower other people around me to do the other tasks. And that's challenging for me because I want to have my paws on everything. And, that idea like, oh, well, only I can do it, that's just an ego-driven thing that will just drive your business and your life into the ground.
It's easy to get caught up in what other people are doing too. You see somebody else make an amazing video, or you see them doing a podcast in a specific way, and you're like, ooh, maybe I should do that. Maybe I should change it up.
It's really interesting to track that in both podcasting and YouTube. When Casey came on the scene and started vlogging, like, he reinvented that genre in a beautiful way. But then so many people have mimicked that and copied that. And so the real question is, what's next? Like, where's the white space? What are people not doing? Where is there a need or a void that can be filled? And, my podcast, I started it's been 5 years. So I wouldn't say that I was an early adopter of the medium, because it was online in 2006 or whatever. I started in 2012. But it wasn't cool to have a podcast when I started. The growth of this medium has exploded just in the last 2 years alone, and it's really become kind of the new blog. And I've stuck to my guns and have enough experience now to know how to do it the way that I want to do it. And I don't spend a lot of time paying attention to what other people are doing, but I am trying to evolve with it as well. And, we're in a video culture. So the evolution that we were talking about just before we started this was stepping into video and like, how can I do something creative and interesting in that space that isn't copycatting, but is also capturing, the wisdom and the experience of the guests that I have on, and translating it in a way that's dynamic to an audience that isn't necessarily listening to podcasts on their iPhone. You know what I mean? I think the YouTube audience and the podcast audience, if you drew a Venn diagram, they overlap, but they're also very different.
Yeah, that's when I saw you start to do the video and brought on David to start making these really high quality, beautiful videos, and also filming your entire podcast episodes. I was like, damn it. That's what I thought was like making me unique, because I hadn't seen anybody doing it that way, where it's,
but they will be soon.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's gonna happen. Do you see anybody today doing it at that level?
There's a lot of documenting, and there's a lot of kind of crappy camcorder type visuals that go along with podcasting, but I haven't seen anybody elevate it to an art form yet. And with you, I mean, look, the Minimalism documentary you made is amazing. Like, I love that movie. Like, you're gifted and talented. I have no doubt that what you're creating now and will create, or what this will evolve into, will probably set the bar for that. But I think that's the white space, right? So there's people videoing their podcasts with GoPros and camcorders, but how can you do it how can you elevate that medium and make it a little bit more interesting?
So a big part of this podcast, it's called The Ground Up Show. So it's going back and kind of deconstructing how you got here, how you started the podcast, how you got into fitness, and everything in between. Back in college, when you're thinking about going out into the quote unquote real world, what was your idea of success? What did it look like for you?
My idea of success at that time was a very traditional one, premised on the American dream. I grew up upper middle class in Washington, D.C. I went to a private all-boys high school. I wore a coat and tie. I was a good boy. I never got in trouble. But I was also a very awkward, insecure kid. I had a patch on my eye and wore the headgear, and was the last kid picked for kickball and all that kind of stuff, and ultimately found solace and success in the swimming pool. So by the time I was a senior in high school, I was a top-ranked recruit in swimming, and got into every college that I applied to. I had my pick of the litter and went to Stanford, unbelievable academic institution, and also the best swimming program in the country at that time. And so I was somebody with a lot of promise, and somebody who grew up in a household where education was paramount. And I think, not explicitly, but there was expectations both placed on me and internally driven to live up to the opportunities that I was lucky enough to have, right? So it started out with the idea of being a doctor. I always thought I was gonna be a doctor. I was good in biology, studied that in college the first couple of years, but really my collegiate years are mostly about my introduction to alcohol. And that was something that was new to me at the time. I wasn't partying in high school. I was swimming, but when I got to college, partying and having a good time really took center stage and started to really put a drain on my ambitions. And I lost interest in in the sciences and shifted my major. And ultimately, by the time I graduated, like, I was just, where's my next good time? I never really put a lot of thought into what I wanted to be, or what was unique about me, or what made me happy. All of that energy was in swimming. And when swimming was over, I was like, wow, I never really thought about what I wanted to do. All I wanted to do was party. So like, I moved to New York City because it seemed like a great place to get drunk. And then law school just seemed like, well, that's what you do when you know, you have this pedigree that I had, and you're not sure what you want to do. My dad's a lawyer. He loves being a lawyer, but it was never like he wanted me to, he never put any pressure on me to be a lawyer. It was almost like a default thing. Well, that's a good career path. It's safe. You know, you get to wear a nice suit and go out to nice lunches and talk about intellectual things. Like, that sounds good. You know, it wasn't driven by a passion for the law or some desire to right wrongs, or you know, kind of an innate desire to pursue justice or anything like that. So it was about like being safe, being secure, not taking risks. You know, that was very much my mindset.
Was there any other options for you at the time, at least as you saw them?
Well, it was different. I mean, when I graduated from college, it was 1989. This is pre-internet. You know, I had the old Macintosh, you know, the original Macintosh computer. And I remember like going to the career counselors like building at Stanford, and you think, this is Stanford, like, you know, they must have like all kinds of interesting opportunities for people. And it was just brochures for consulting companies, and you know, you could sign up to get interviewed by these investment banks, but it was pretty limited. It was like consulting and investment banking and being a paralegal in a law firm. Like, it seemed like those were the only options, which is weird. Like, the idea that you could go online and that this whole world would open up to you, where you could explore all these different, interesting, compelling, dynamic career paths as a young person. I couldn't find that. It didn't seem like it was available to me. I'm sure it was, but, you know, and I'm sure I didn't look very hard either. But I just sort of took the path of least resistance, I suppose.
I'm curious about the transitions in your life, because you go from college to joining a law firm, and then from the law firm to doing freelance, and then freelance to fitness and being an author and podcaster. Like, those transitions to me are fascinating because they're terrifying and they seem incredibly risky. So you must have been making pretty good money as a lawyer and building a career in LA.
Yeah, I mean, right after college, I worked at a law firm in New York City as a paralegal, which was a horrible experience, a big Wall Street law firm. And I just, you know, the people who were working there, I was like, who are they? It didn't resonate with me at all. And it's shocking to me now in retrospect that I went to law school after that experience. But it was like, well, that's what you do. And I went to law school and somehow squeaked my way through that, despite, you know, the fact that my alcoholism was really starting to cause problems in my life. Got a job at a law firm in San Francisco, then moved down to Los Angeles to work in an entertainment firm. And that's where the shit kind of hit the fan in terms of my alcoholism, and my life fell apart at that time. And that's a whole other story I'm happy to get into if you want. But ultimately got sober at 31. And the next 8 years was about trying to repair all the wreckage that I had created as a result of my drinking and using. And I kind of took all of that compulsive addict alcoholic energy and invested it in workaholism. And I was successful in that regard. By the time I was 38, 39 years old, successful legal career, living in Los Angeles, met my wife, building a family, decent income, all the good stuff, like all the stuff, you know, like nice sports car. And if you were on the outside looking in, you'd be like, this guy's got a good life. But on the inside, I was dying. It was like this whole time I'd been trying to jam this square peg into a round hole. I was deeply dissatisfied with my career choices. It was fueling like a low-grade depression. I wasn't taking care of myself physically. I'd put on all this weight and terrible lifestyle habits and all of that. And I was desperate to try to figure out, like, how am I going to, is this the rest of my life? You know, I looked around in the law firm where I worked, and I didn't aspire to the lives of the partners. They all were making great money and were successful, and some of them really enjoyed what they did and good people. But I just didn't, I was like, I don't see myself in that role, but I was trying to force it. You know, I was like denying who I was at my core, because I'd never really looked at that and explored, like, well, who am I? What is it that I'm here to express? And what is unique about me? And what makes me happy? Like, those weren't questions I asked myself, nor was I ever encouraged to ask myself. And it really was sort of fomenting into this existential crisis. Like, And, I've only changed my life as a result of being in pain. That's been the only true motivator to get me to shift my ways. And it wasn't an overnight thing. I mean, there's a lot of things that came into play, and it was a long road and many years of trying to recalibrate my professional career and my personal career. And it wasn't easy. Like I didn't stop practicing law until the day my first book came out. So I was practicing law and writing a book and training for all these ultra distance events, that none of which was really generating any money, and kind of slowly escalating out of what was then a solo law practice. I was no longer in a big law firm, but still couldn't see the path forward. How am I going to, even though I wrote a book and got paid to write that book, it wasn't enough to support a family with 4 kids. Like, how am I going to craft a career based on the things that I was slowly learning, that I was passionate about, and that I had a voice and a platform to pursue? There was no template for how to do that. And I had to craft it out of whole cloth, I think. And it wasn't linear by any stretch of the imagination.
It doesn't seem like there is a template now, even today, to say these are the steps that you have to take in order to get where you want to go.
No, I mean, for me, it was very much a leap of faith gets thrown around very cavalierly, but it was. I was like, I'm not practicing law anymore. I have no idea where my next paycheck is gonna come from. I don't know how that's gonna work at all. But I trusted that I knew myself well enough, and I knew the feedback that I was getting from the book was potent enough to say, there is something here. Like, if I fully devote myself to figuring this out, I will figure it out. And I don't know what that's going to look like. And, we went through some very difficult financial times, and we almost lost our house. I risked everything, and I put a tremendous amount of strain on my family. My wife always had my back. She was like, you're not going back to being a lawyer. This is what you have to do. You just have to stay the course. And without that support, I never would have been able to do it. But it was really just showing up every day, trying to pay attention. What can I do? And it was just being in service. What can I offer? Well, I'll write this blog post, or I'll go give this talk, or I'll go do this, none of which I was getting paid for. The podcast I did it for 2 years before I made a single dollar on it. I just did it because it just seemed like a way to continue the conversation that my book began. I didn't start it as thinking it was going to be some kind of professional enterprise. It was just something I felt strongly about. I felt called to do. And I think the lesson that I've learned as a result of that is that if you've done the internal work to really know yourself and what you're passionate about, and if you can have the courage and the faith to step into that indeed the universe will conspire to support you, and you will find your way. And it doesn't mean that it's going to work out the way that you want it to work out, or think that it's going to work out. And your timeline is not going to be the timeline that's going to play out. But my experience is that by remaining steadfast, that is how I was able to see it through and be able to sit here and talk to you today.
Yeah, I believe pretty heavily in calculated risks. So I graduated college with $96,000 in student loan debt. And then I did the smartest thing I could think of. I bought a brand new car.
Yeah,
so that
nice.
I was about $118,000 in debt. So I was in no place to just risk it all. And I guess risk, it affects everybody a little bit differently. Some people can take risks a little bit more easily than others. But I think that's probably one of the biggest things is what can you stomach? How little can you live on? Can you live on rice and beans for the next 2 years trying to make it work?
Probably most people are not willing to take enough risk, and they're also not willing to do the work or what it takes to achieve that life. They don't want to live on rice and beans. They don't want to sell their car, or they want to be able to maintain their lifestyle and live the dream occupation. And I think you have to be willing to sacrifice quite a bit if that's what you want. And ultimately, my experience is that, and this is, I'm sure this from, being in the world of the minimalists, when you're actively engaged in something you love doing that is personally fulfilling to you, all that other stuff doesn't mean anything anymore. When I was making a bunch of money and I was miserable, I would just obsess on when am I going to get, I need a new suit, or I need this pair of shoes, or it was all about what am I going to buy to make me feel better, because I wasn't even aware of how much I was suffering. And I felt like that would salve that wound on an unconscious level. And now that I get to do what I like doing, and I'm fulfilled in that, like I don't think about stuff.
It seems contradictory to a lot of people to say once you stop focusing on the money, that's when the money comes. It's kind of ironic how that happens.
But it's a spiritual equation.
It really is, because if all you're doing is making something in the hopes to get rich and famous, you're so misguided in your direction that I don't think you're actually going to realize all the ways that that's going to affect your art and what you're creating and what you're putting out in the world. I'm actually curious about, as you evolved and as you started to get into fitness, what was the tipping point for you to get into fitness and start exercising?
I was pursuing this legal career. I was having this existential crisis. And meanwhile, as I said, I wasn't taking care of myself physically, 50 pounds overweight. And shortly before I turned 40, this existential crisis that I was having sort of collided with a health scare. I was walking up a simple flight of stairs up to my bedroom late one night. This was like shortly before I turned 40, and had to pause halfway up the staircase, like winded, out of breath, and tightness in my chest that had me kind of buckled over and really scared. You know, heart disease runs in my family. My grandfather, who had been a champion swimmer at the University of Michigan in the late 1920s, had died very young of a heart attack, which devastated my mother. I don't think she's ever really fully recovered from that. And she used to tell me my whole life, like, you got to watch what you eat, and heart disease runs in the family. But it's like, you know, when you're young, you know, you don't, it's like in one ear, out the other. And having that experience at a young age and still thinking of myself as like this fit Stanford swimmer, even though I wasn't, really woke me up and made me realize, like, I really need to fundamentally change my priorities and how I'm living. And that's what launched me into this exploration of nutrition and food. And that was something that, you know, wasn't overnight either, but ultimately led me to attempting a plant-based diet, because I tried everything else and nothing seemed to really work. And it was like the one thing that I had in one box I hadn't checked yet, because I didn't really want to do it. It sounded so extreme. Like, oh, you're going to eat no animal products and no processed food. Like, what's left to eat? Like, life is over. There's not going to be any joy anymore. But I guess, you know, you still want to live, right? So I tried it.
It was an experiment to start?
Yeah, an experiment. You know, I just was like, I was trying to find a way to feel good, you know, in my body. Like, what does it feel like to have the energy of a teenager? You know, it was just like, what does it feel like to, like, want to move your body? Like, it was something that I just, as a young person, like, my life was swimming and fitness, and I love the pool and I love competition, and I'd moved so far away from that, and that had brought me so much joy as a young person, and I was trying to recapture that, because that was the one time in my life, like, that was something that made me really happy. And as you grow older, it's sort of like, well, that's kids play, like, now you're an adult, you don't do that anymore. But I was like so desperate to just reconnect with something that gave me that sense once again. And within a week or two of this plant-based diet experiment, I started to feel myself again. Like, I really had this restoration of vitality that was pretty profound. And that's what gave me this impulse to start taking care of myself once again. And that started out very low key, like, you know, pulling an old pair of running shoes out of the closet and going out for a jog for the first time in a long time, or going back to the pool for the first time in as long as I could remember. And my wife bought me a bike for my 40th birthday. And, you know, I didn't have any desire to be competitive in sports anymore. I just wanted to, like, not have a gut, and I wanted to be able to, like, not walk around feeling like shit all the time. Really, that was it. But I had a couple, like, breakthrough moments, like the weight was melting off, and I went out for this run one day after I'd been doing this maybe 4 months or so, and I was like in the zone, man. And I ended up doing like a 24-mile run. I hadn't run longer than an hour prior to that. And it was a crazy, like, watershed moment where I was like, wow, like, not only is this plant-based diet agreeing with me, like, I feel like I just unlocked a part of myself that I didn't realize that I had. And it got me thinking a lot about the resiliency of the human body and spirit, which is something that, you know, I experienced going from, you know, being a pretty gutter rat drunk into being sober, and what other areas of my life had I overlooked, and you know, what is the, you know, where is the hidden potential in my life that I'm blind to right now. And that's what got me interested in the world of ultra endurance sports, because it's like this template to really push that and explore that. So that's what lured me into this crazy world of doing these, wild races that I've done over the years.
Yeah, I want to get into the races. I really want to touch on you tend to shy away from the word vegan. It's kind of become a bad word. Is it more plant powered?
I mean, I don't shy away from it. I think that whether it's plant-based, plant power, I like to call it, because it's sort of a positive, affirmative, way of looking at it. I don't shy away from the word vegan, but I think the word vegan gets conflated with politics, and I think people have a certain predisposition or idea of what being vegan is. I think that's changing a lot now, but even like 4 or 5 years ago, or in 2012 when my book came out, if you use the word vegan, everybody has a mental construct of what that is. Like it's a dreadlock dude kicking a hacky sack up at Humboldt, or you know what I mean? Like, yeah. Which is cool. Like, but I never identified with that. Like, I never thought I would be vegan, because I don't like, that's not me. Like, I like those guys. I have friends like that, but like, that's not my vibe. So plant-based is more neutral. Plant-powered is more empowering, I think. But it's the same. And I would say, as a caveat to that when I began this journey, like, it wasn't because I had some deep compassion for the animals or the environment. I really just wanted to feel better. That was it. I wanted to lose weight. I wanted to feel good. Plant-based worked for me. But the idea of bringing politics into it didn't seem like that just wasn't where I was coming from. But having now been somebody who's lived this lifestyle for the last 10 years, like, those issues have become much more important to me. I think there are things that we need to talk more about.
That's exactly how I feel about minimalism. I got into minimalism because I was personally dissatisfied. I felt like I would never be successful. I'd never achieve anything. So it was really personal and kind of selfish. But then once you get into it, it starts to open up these other ideas for you. In terms of the being vegan and experimenting, I started 3 days ago, my 30-day challenge to go vegan.
Oh, yeah. Right on.
So I'm 3 days in now.
How do you feel?
I feel pretty good. I mean, my body's changing. It's pretty clear my body's changing. And I want to go the rich roll way, which is a lot of people have the false assumption that you're going to be weaker by being vegan. And I really like going to the gym and lifting. So I want to get stronger by the end of the 30 days. So I guess what missteps might I make in my first week or so in?
I think that, I'd have to get granular on what exactly you're eating and not eating. But in terms of like common mistakes, I think some people, if they're saying they feel weak, they're probably not eating enough calories, because they're used to eating more calorically dense foods. Meat and dairy tend to be that way. So then they go plant-based and they're just eating salad, and they're just not fueling themselves with enough food. So I would say, don't worry so much about the volume of food that you're eating. If you're eating plant-based foods close to their natural state, like, knock yourself out. These foods are so fiber rich, like, you can eat as much as you want and you're going to be okay. Don't worry too much about the protein thing. I mean, you want to make sure you're meeting your protein needs, but you're not going to have a problem doing that. Just make sure you're eating beans and lentils and quinoa and things like that are higher, are higher in protein in the plant world. And I think you're going to be fine. You don't have to go nuts with protein powders, and I don't know what you were doing with that before. But I think that
Josh came over the other day and he saw I have this massive protein thing. Yeah. And then he just was dying laughing, because he's like, I've never seen a protein thing that big. It's like the one with like the bodybuilders on it.
Yeah, that stuff's garbage, man.
But the thing is, though, when I first got into fitness, so I went from being 125 pounds to 165 in my, like, towards the end of college.
Right.
So I'd always been a really scrawny guy, and then putting on weight, for me, the protein shakes helped out in the very beginning. Like, that's how, at least in my eyes, I was able to do it, and to do it very easily. So it's always been something that's been a part of my workout. It's like before or after, it just kind of becomes a ritual.
Yeah. Here's what I would say. There's this idea, you're going plant-based, so you're going to be sacrificing your body's ability to be strong, which is a misnomer. It's misguided. It's a myth. In fact, my experience has been quite the opposite. First of all, you're eating foods that are much more nutritionally dense, like much more dense in terms of phytonutrients and micronutrients. So you're actually fueling your body with what it needs. Secondarily, you're eating foods that are much more alkaline forming and anti-inflammatory by and large. not every plant food is anti-inflammatory, but when you're eating tons of dark leafy greens and like healthy fruits and vegetables, you are eating a much more anti-inflammatory diet than the standard American diet, or even a clean diet that includes meat and dairy. Meat and dairy are very acid forming. They're very inflammation provoking. And this is important in the context of being an athlete or performance, because the more anti-inflammatory your diet, the more rapidly your body's going to be able to recover in between workouts. And you know, as somebody who goes to the gym, that you don't make gains in the gym, you make gains in the time in between your gym sessions, right? So the better that you can take care of yourself in between workouts through nutrition and other, practices, rehab and all that kind of stuff, the harder you're going to be able to train in the gym. So I would say that it's not accurate to say that eating plant-based makes you a better athlete or a stronger athlete, but it will allow you to, and this is my personal experience, it will allow you to train harder, recover more quickly, so that the next time you go to the gym, you can train harder again or train longer. You're less likely to get injured or get sick and then miss workouts. So over the course of several months or a year, you're going to experience greater gains than you would otherwise. So it's the recovery enhancement aspect of eating plant-based that I think has been almost a secret weapon for me. And I think it's what allowed me to go from relatively sedentary to competing in races like Ultraman in a fairly compressed period of time.
In terms of this 30-day challenge, where do you think I might slip up? I know I've done this before, but not to this degree. I've done no dairy, no milk, cheese, and I will, be out of the movies and just you go into these old routines where I'm like, okay, get popcorn and then sit down, and then I'm halfway through my thing of popcorn and I realize, oh shit, I was not supposed to eat dairy.
Right.
Where might I slip up, and what do I need to be prepared for?
What are your hot button foods? Like what are your guilty pleasures? Is it sugar or is it greasy foods?
At least lately, it would be some mochi before bed, or a little bit of ice cream. That stuff I think is kind of easy because I just won't bring it in the house. Natalie, my girlfriend, and I, we go out to eat a lot, and we go out to nice restaurants, and I'll usually get a steak. We eat a pretty meat-based diet. Like that is probably 80% of our diet at this point.
Well, right in your neighborhood here, there are some fantastic vegan restaurants. You have Gracias Madre, which is unbelievable. You got Real Food Daily. There's Veggie Grill. That's kind of junk foody. That's not the healthiest, but it's vegan. Plenty of like really nice, places right around here, some of which are in walking distance. But the greater issue, I would say, is always trying to make the healthy choice the convenient choice. So it's good to get rid of, remove those temptations from arm's length in your house, but always making sure that you're kind of one step ahead, so that when you are hungry, you're not like, you don't succumb to that unhealthy craving. So you could do things like just get like, I don't know if you have a rice cooker, or, just have like rice and beans like in your fridge. You can make like a chili, or like rice and beans with guacamole and hot sauce, is always ready there. And that will fill you up, right? It's got protein, it's got carbohydrates, it's got some healthy fats with the avocado, and you're good to go. Or keeping things like, we're in LA, so I don't know about you, but like I'm driving all the time, right? So I try to keep healthy snacks in my car, almonds, dates, bananas, just real food, so that I can snack on them, and they're always kind of there, so I keep my appetite at bay. And I see you have a Vitamix in your kitchen.
Oh my God, it's amazing. Yeah,
it's unbelievable, right? So that's your new best friend. And like, I don't know what your habits and practices are around your Vitamix, but I would make sure that you always have tons of healthy produce, fruits and dark leafy greens, beets, things like that. And what I like to do is start my day with I just pack so much shit into that Vitamix.
Yeah.
Like kale, spinach, beets are great pre-workout, tons of berries, banana, pineapple, whatever you have. Make like a huge blend, maybe put a little coconut oil or something like that in there. And then you don't have to drink the whole thing, like drink a glass, I don't know if you work out in the morning, you go to the gym or whatever, and you can like thermos the rest or keep the rest and sip it throughout the morning. And it keeps your energy really high. Like you feel good. Like, how it is when you make that blend and you drink it in the morning, you can almost feel like yourself coming alive. Like, because because it blends it so well, it's almost pre-digested. So it's very easily absorbed into your system, and you can feel that boost of energy very quickly. And so if you're just kind of hitting on that throughout the morning or even in the afternoon, it keeps your appetite at bay and it keeps your energy high. And that way, when you sit down for mealtime, you're not like overeating or prone to eat that thing that you know you're not supposed to eat or shouldn't eat.
I'm trying to make the perfect recipe and simple recipe, but it's been challenging.
I'd focus more on the blending and less on the juicing. And I wouldn't get caught up in the perfect recipe. Like, you know, there's like 7 people living in my house. Every time I open up the fridge, it's like, who knows what's going to be in there, you know? Yeah. So it's like, I just make do with whatever we happen to have. And there's always a way to make something interesting or good. And it's not always going to be the best tasting or like the ultimate, you know, blend of the day. But, you know, if you're just putting lots of fruits and vegetables in there and rotating it, you can get crazy with superfoods and get spirulina and chlorella and like chia seeds and flax seeds and hemp seeds, and all those things are great if you have the budget for that, but you don't need all that stuff. Like just fruits and vegetables, blending it up. You're getting so much fiber, which is what most people are deficient in. And, you know, when we talk about going plant-based, everyone's worried about protein, but really nobody's protein deficient. Like, doctors are not treating patients for a protein deficiency. Like, it's this crazy weird myth where we believe we need like tons and tons of protein, and yet most people are walking around fiber deficient because they're not eating enough fruits and vegetables. And you're getting a tremendous amount of fiber, which is going to really boost your immune system and your digestion and all of that.
I've been pretty neurotic lately with the sleep cycle, tracking my sleep at night. It doesn't look like I get great sleep, or at least I just wake up a lot. Do you think a plant-based diet will help with sleep?
I mean, sleep's a weird thing. Like I as I get older, like I've started to struggle a little bit with sleep. Like if I'm not training really hard, like I have issues with that myself, and I'm always looking for ways of like improving that. Magnesium in your tea or hot water at night is helpful. Some people find CBD oil to be helpful with that. If you're into that kind of thing.
Is that like marijuana based?
Well, it's hemp based. It's not psychoactive. It doesn't have that in it, but it's like a cannabinoid. Yeah. You know, tea, not having your devices in your bedroom, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, which is tough because I'm tracking it on my phone.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so bad though, because that's like the first thing I'll do when I wake up. I'm like, oh, let me. Well, then
you're good, and you have anxiety because you're like, what's my tracker say?
For real?
Like, am I sleeping deep enough? Like that's not how that's working at cross purposes.
Oh, it really is.
Like
literally, when I wake up, I think like, I wonder how my tracking is doing, and it's been happening for the past 2 weeks. So I'm like, this is probably really counterintuitive.
Do you watch TV in bed?
No, we haven't in a while. And like TV, as in, I think the new thing now wouldn't be TV, but just like bringing your laptop in bed and watching Netflix. We don't do that and haven't done that for a while, which has helped out a lot. But we probably will watch like Curb Your Enthusiasm or a show before bed, which I would like to get into the habit of having maybe an hour of downtime before where I'm not looking at any screens. Just like a morning routine. I think you have to have some kind of night routine just to prepare you for bed.
For sure.
I remember one part in your book where you were training and you felt like in order to prepare for this race you had coming up, you had to train harder and faster and stronger. And your trainer told you to actually do something contradictory, which would be to train slower.
Yeah, I mean, I had been somebody who, you know, grew up in swimming, and you just go hard. Every set, go as hard as you can. And then carrying that into being kind of an amateur athlete, I have an hour, so I'm going to go out and run, and I'll just make the most of the hour. I'll run as fast as I can, or whatever pace I can sustain for that hour. Like, the way to get the most out of that time is to push yourself as hard as you can. It turns out that's counterproductive, especially if you want to, reach your potential as an endurance athlete. So in the context of endurance sports and ultra endurance sports, speed really isn't that important. What's important is efficiency. And as my coach says, my coach is 2-time Olympic swimmer. He's won Ironmans. He's age group world champion in Ironman. This guy knows what he's talking about. He said something very profound to me, which is the prize doesn't go to the fastest guy. It goes to the guy who slows down the least. And I thought about that, and I was like, that's right. And that's also true in life, right? It's not about how fast you're going. It's like the classic rabbit in the hare. So what he taught me, and what has been really, I think, key to my success as an athlete, is learning how to train your aerobic system. So we have two energy burning systems in our bodies, the aerobic and the anaerobic. The anaerobic system is that energy system that your body utilizes for fast bursts and, like in the gym when you're bench pressing, power, strength, explosive movements. And that energy system runs on glucose, on sugar. And it's a system that basically you can maintain for about 45 minutes before you run out of glucose or you just burn out altogether. Your aerobic system relies on fat and oxygen for fuel. It's your go all day engine. It's that low intensity level of effort that can propel you throughout the day. So proficiency in endurance sports is about building that aerobic engine, making it incredibly efficient. And you do that by doing a lot of low threshold work, like running far below that pace that you feel like you should be running, right? Running so that you can carry on a conversation when you're running. Running at a pace that when you're new to this feels like you're not getting anything out of it and you think you're wasting your time. But in doing that, you're building mitochondrial density. You're building your body's ability to utilize fat for fuel and do it very efficiently. And over time, well, let's say you start out and you can't, if you get lactate tested, you know exactly what these zones are. It's called zone 2. By not exceeding your zone 2, which for me in running means my heart rate can't go over like 135 or 140. When you start out and you don't have any experience with this, that's almost like walking, brisk walk, and then your heart rate spiking. If you're wearing a heart rate monitor, you're like, this is ridiculous. I can't go more than like an 11-minute mile without my heart going. Yeah. But if you stick to it, 3 months later, you're doing a 9-minute mile at that heart rate. And then a year later, you're running an 8-minute mile. And then before you know it, you're running a 7-minute mile. So it feels like the same exertion level. And you're like, that's profound.
Yeah,
like,
that's
wow.
Like a cheat code.
Right. But the thing is, it takes time, and you have to be patient with it, and you have to really adhere to it. It's not an overnight success. It's not a hack. It's the opposite of a hack, actually. It requires a lot of time investment and a lot of diligence, and it's a different kind of discipline. Like, we think of discipline in the context of being an athlete as being that impulse to get you out of bed when you don't want to get out of bed, and to go the extra mile, and to be really focused on like outworking your fellow, whatever athlete. But this discipline requires you to hold back, which is like contrary to the impulse of the ambitious athlete, right? Who wants to outwork everybody. And by doing that, you create this amazing foundation that allows you to run efficiently at faster and faster speeds at a very low level of energy output. And I think that's what's allowed me to succeed, by like believing in that. And I've like experienced what it's like to really invest in that. The average person, let's say you're a runner, they go out and they do that hour run, that 45-minute run, and they do it at that brisk pace as fast as they think they can. And what they're doing is they think they're getting a good workout in, and on some level they are, but ultimately they're going to hit a glass ceiling, because when you're doing that, you're not going slow enough to build your aerobic engine, and you're not going fast enough to build the explosive speed and power of the anaerobic engine. You're kind of in the middle. It's called the gray zone. And so you can reach a certain level of athletic proficiency by staying in the gray zone, but ultimately you're never going to progress, because you're in that no man's land that really isn't focusing on becoming more adept at either of those two energy systems.
Would you say it makes your runs easier, or just it helps to push you a little bit further than you would have been able to do otherwise?
Well, now it allows me to like run great distances, and because I've been doing it for so many years now, like I can go out and run for hours and hours, and it's just not that taxing. Like, people are like, oh, you must be eating all day long with all this training that you're doing. It's like, no, actually I eat like a normal person, because what used to, 8 years ago it would have required an unbelievable amount of energy for me to go out and run 20, 30 miles. Now I can do that, and it's like, okay, that's fine. Like, what else is going on today? You know what I mean?
You can like do your emails
it's
while
crazy.
You're running.
Yeah.
Still, when you're doing these big runs that really push you, you have to be living in so much pain. Like, what is your relationship with pain?
Yeah, I think I have a high pain tolerance. I mean, I learned that as a swimmer, learning how to push your body and kind of maintain that. And it very much becomes a mental thing, because your brain gives out long before the body. The body is in pain. It's sending signals to the brain, stop, stop, stop. But your body can actually go much further and much longer and much harder than we think it can. Usually it's our brain that shuts it off well before that. And I think the longer that I do this, the more you become in touch with that. There's a endurance athlete named David Goggins. He's been on my podcast. He's personally inspiring to me, and he said something that's always stuck with me, which is that when you think you're done and you can't go any further, you've actually only tapped into about 40% of what you're truly capable of, and I believe that to be fundamentally true. But pain is like a muscle, it's like you can acclimate to it, you can get used to it, and your benchmark for tolerable versus intolerable will shift.
I see that more in my personal life and how far I'm willing to push myself, and how much risk I'm willing to take to do something. Like when we were making Minimalism, I would work 10 to 12 hours a day, knowing that this is a short stint. Like this is my sprint. This is my marathon. I'm going to be doing this for 3 months, and I'm going to bust my ass, and I'm going to sacrifice a lot. I'm not going to go out. I'm going to work weekends, but I need to make this happen, because if I don't do it,
the payoff is huge. The upside is tremendous. Like if you really rocked it, you knew like that could change your life.
I did. I kind of,
you didn't know?
No, I think what my mentality was, this could really help people. Like this could change people's lives. I don't know if I was thinking 5 people or 10 million people. I didn't know what the scale would be. I honestly didn't think it would be as big as it was. We didn't think we'd get on Netflix. We didn't think anybody would really watch the film. We're like, oh, we'll just share it with our small community of people that really are into minimalism. One of the reasons I started the podcast is because a lot of people have a misconception about what went into making the documentary. They think there was 20 people on set, and especially when they see Catalyst Films and Spire Media bring you this production, I'm Catalyst. Like it's just me. I'm trying to just shed the light that people can go out there and make this stuff. Everybody has the opportunity to do it. And what I'm trying to do is inspire people to make the meaningful content, because it's a lot of stuff out there is kind of vapid, and people aren't really focusing on the intent behind it. Why are you making it? Is it actually going to make an impact?
Yeah, a couple observations on that. The first is I love what you said about creating meaningful content. And as I'm kind of trying to inch my way into this video space, that's really my marching orders. Like, should I, does anybody really need to see another vlog? Like, how can I create content that actually is helpful and can last, over time and has substance to it? That's harder to do, but ultimately, like, if you're not doing that, then what are you doing? Secondly, you said something very interesting, which is when you were making the movie, that you were really focused on this idea of how it could help people. And I think that that's a beautiful sentiment, because service is the ultimate renewable energy source. Like when you're coming from that place, from the heart, where you're like, I'm really here to try to convey something that I think can be of benefit to other people, that's what gets you through the adversity. That's what's gonna allow you to show up for it day after day after day when you're facing obstacles. And I found that the more that I'm in that service mindset of like, how am I helping people? That's what not only keeps me going, but keeps me excited, and also, gives me the that extra boost when you're tired and you don't want to do it, or you're faced with an obstacle that you don't think you can get over. And I think it's the secret to success. If you can find a way to do something that you're passionate about, filmmaking, and tie that to service in a meaningful way, that's when doors fly open, and that's when the universe again shows up to conspire to support you.
You can slip up too, when, like you said, it's not a straight line with a lot of this stuff.
No.
And even now, building the podcast and doing certain things, you start to get caught up in looking at the metrics and being like, okay, how many followers do I have? And how much is my growth over the past 3 months?
And what is that iTunes algorithm, and why is it always screwing me?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it doesn't matter. Like, that's not going to affect you. Literally, if you didn't look at any of the comments, you didn't look at any of your views, or you just kept putting stuff out and put a blindfold on, I feel like you'd be way better off, and you're more likely to make something stick because you don't care about what people are saying. You're just trying to help.
I'm competitive. I'm an athlete. Like, so I'll be just as competitive when I'm looking at the metrics of the pie, and I have to like go, no, that's not what this is about. And it's not necessarily about how many people are listening or trying to get as many people to listen as possible. It's about how can I be of maximum service to the people that are already tuning in, who are already on this wavelength, who want to hear from me. I have to serve those people. And if I'm in that heart space and I'm in that service minded mentality, then ultimately that's the secret to growing it anyway, right? When you can like stop looking at all of that and stop being influenced by what other people are doing and like, well, he's doing that, so I should do that. Like, you gotta like cut that off and just focus on, okay, what do I bring? Nobody is you. There are other people with podcasts that are interviewing people, but nobody is you. So how can you bring more of you into it and your aesthetic and sensibility and the issues that you care about most? And ultimately, that audience will gravitate towards you, and your job is to take care of them.
Why'd you start your podcast?
I had become a fan of the medium in training for all these races, because when you're out on an 8-hour bike ride, you can't listen to music the whole time. I was listening to audiobooks, and then I started listening to podcasts, and I really fell in love with the format, and I couldn't understand why everybody wasn't listening to them. I was like, this is great. Like, and at that time, the herd was pretty thin. Like, there were some great shows, but it kind of dropped off. Like, there wasn't a lot of depth, right? So there were there were shows that exist now that are still big, like Joe Rogan was doing his thing, and a lot of comedy shows, very comedy heavy. NPR had tons of stuff, but I just got really into it, and I was like, wow, I can program my entire day around all these audio why am I listening to the radio? Why am I letting somebody else tell me what I should be listening to? I can design my own experience here. And I thought it was amazing, and I learned so much. I'd be out riding my bike, and I'd be I'd be feeding my mind at the same time. But I also was like the only person that I knew that was listening to them. Like, it's just not that many people were hip to it. But my book came out in 2012, and that chapter, it was like, okay, well, that happened. Like, what are you going to do now? And it was this thing where I was kind of like, this is going to be my big moment. Like, I walked away from the law, and I realized, like, okay, this book, like, it can come and go. Like, so most books do. It'll be a flash in the pan for a minute, and then everyone moves on. But if I really like invest myself and really hustle my butt off, like, maybe I can use this as a way to change my life. So that's why I was like, I didn't renew my bar membership. I was like, I'm going all in, and I did it, and I did as much as I could, in the situation where I was in at that point, which is that not many people knew who I was, to get it out there. And it did okay. It wasn't like a New York Times bestseller or anything like that. It had a little following. But once that kind of PR moment passed, it's like, well, now what? And I was like, is anybody going to call? Like, like the phone wasn't ringing, and I was like, and we were running out of money, and it was a scary moment. And ultimately, I moved my family to Hawaii for 3 months, and we lived on an organic farm because there's an entrepreneur there who was trying to create this conscious community, and he wanted my advice, and he paid our family to do that, which was like the only money, like it was a godsend, because like there was no money coming in. But when I was there, I also had a lot of free time, and I was getting island fever. I was like, I worked so hard to like create a connection with people, and now I'm on this island. I felt a million miles away from people, and I was starting to get jittery about it. And I was like, I need to do something. Like, I need a creative outlet. Like, the book's done. What am I doing now? And I was like, I'm just gonna, and maybe I'll start a podcast. Like, I love the medium. Maybe I could do this. And my sons are musicians, so we had mics and we had a soundboard, and I watched Pat Flynn's video tutorial on how to start a podcast, and he walked me through the whole thing. Like, if Pat Flynn didn't have that, I don't know if you watched those videos, but he has like a step-by-step, like, here's what you do. It's easier now than it used to be. Like, there's all this weird stuff that it's wow, this is actually harder to get configured than you would think. It should be easier than this. Had those videos not existed, I don't know if I ever would have been able to figure it out on my own. But I just did everything that he said and hit record on this first podcast, just my wife and I. And we just started talking, and I had a blast. And I remember saying in that very first episode, like, this is not a triathlon podcast. I have a vision for what I think would be cool here. And to this day, it's really kind of, it has remained true to that sentiment. but I didn't know if I was going to do a second one. But it was a thrill to like create something and put it out in the world. And there weren't that many people that listened to the first one, barely any, but enough where I was like, let's do it again. I think we did the second one like a day later. You know, I was like, I'll just do this every day. You know, like
yeah.
But it was so early on in the podcast world that iTunes just shot it right to the top of the health ranking. So from day one, like I had visibility. And then it got me traction. You know, I think if I was starting it today, it'd be a very different story. But it's like the one time in my life where I was like doing the right thing at the right moment. And I was a little bit ahead of the curve. And that allowed me to make a little bit of a land grab, and people started to listen. And, you know, I was stuck in Kauai. So I was like, who can I talk to? You know, like who's here? And so I had to do some Skype stuff, and it's just evolved. I mean, you know, my early episodes are so imperfect and so flawed. I can't even imagine going back and listening to them. I would cringe, but I just kept going, you know, and it got better, and I got better at listening and better at asking questions. And, you know, as the audience grew, it got easier to get interesting people to talk to me. And it's really just been this organic, you know, nonlinear journey that I've been on that has taken me, you know, on this path that I would have never expected.
I like how you started, how you didn't overthink it. You just click
No.
record. Your kids made an amazing opening track, though. By
Yeah,
the way.
well, they're very gifted. It's funny because that theme song they did it in like 15 minutes, and I was like, all right, this will be a temp track, you know, and it stayed to this.
It's the
day.
same one you still have, right?
Yeah,
it's really good, though. I was surprised. I was like, holy shit, man, this is amazing.
They're very talented musicians. They're about to release their first album.
Oh wow, that's
Cool.
amazing.
Yeah, but yeah, we did it in a warehouse with like, you know, mics that you use for guitar, like the wrong.
There
kind
was
of
an echo. I remember because I just listened to it.
I was like, we picked the worst building ever to record. It's like the ceiling was like 50 feet high. And it's a concrete floor, and you know, whatever.
But it was imperfect, and you started, and you kept making them.
Yeah, and the lesson there is like, you know, just start. You don't have to. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know where. I think a lot of people hamstring themselves and paralyze themselves because they want all the answers before they begin. They want to know, what is the ultimate running shoe that I need before they ever go out and run? Or what's the GPS watch that I need? Or what's the camera? You know, like everyone, like you hear Casey talking about this all the time. Like people get so caught up in the cameras. Like you have a phone, like go out and make a video. If you want to be a filmmaker, like it's never been easier. All these tools are, you know, at our fingertips now, but we get scared. And so we hide behind the gear or the questions as an excuse to not just begin.
Sometimes it paralyzes me because I'm like, I want this episode to be the best episode I've ever made.
Right.
And like, otherwise I'm not releasing it. But then I think, all right, like future Matt, he's 1,000 episodes in. This one, it's not that big of a deal. Just release it, move on to the next one. Release it, move on to the next one.
Mm-hmm. And the doing of it will tell you what it wants to be. You know, it's like you can't answer that question of what it is until you begin doing it. And it's like a living thing. Like it will evolve, and it will tell you where it wants to go.
You do all your podcasts in person now, right?
Mm-hmm.
What was that a conscious decision to say, all right, like I'm not doing Skype anymore?
Yeah, I mean, I did some Skype interviews early on, and some of them were fine, and some of them were just dictated by geography and things like that. But I realized, like, in thinking, like, well, what am I bringing to this that's different or unique? And I realized that, like, my sweet spot, or where I excel, is really emotionally connecting with my guests. And as somebody who, you know, when I write a book or get interviewed, when I do Skype interviews with people, you know, it's like, I don't know who this person is, and I forget about it 5 minutes later. And for me, like the podcast journey for me is like, I'm interviewing people that I want in my life. Like these are people that like I want to know. And for me, the emotional connection is paramount. It's more important than the information being conveyed. And I need to be with that person. And there's something about locking eyes and sitting across from somebody and engaging with them for 90 minutes to 2 hours to 3 hours at times, where that's an experience that person is not going to forget, you know, and it means something, you know. It's this long form conversation is a lost art form, and it's just not something that we do in our daily lives. Like I had my friend Mishka Shubali was over at my house yesterday. He's been on my podcast like 6 times. He's like my buddy, and our friendship, he's like, I think we spent more time podcasting than just being friends outside of podcasting. And that sounds weird, but at the same time, it's like, well, if we just hung out and went out to eat, would we have had a conversation of this quality and depth?
That's one thing
I probably wouldn't, you know?
And that's one thing I've been wanting to do is just to sit my parents down and have a conversation with them and like record that, and just one-on-one too. Because I'm like, man, when's the last time we just sat down and I asked them questions about their life and about their childhood? I want to do that with all my family and friends, like not to post it, not for anybody else, but
to have
myself,
it for posterity.
Yeah, for my kids.
I thought about that very same thing. And there's something about the formality of it. Like, if there's a mic in front of them, then they feel like they have to answer the question.
They
like
can't
just
dodge
walk
it.
away. And like,
yeah, that's great. There's something too about the constraint. You're creating a constraint on yourself. You are limiting yourself in some way, because you could interview anybody if you were doing it remotely. If you were just doing it through Skype, you could probably have 1,000 episodes at this point if it was that way. But that constraint, it makes your podcast what it is, and it makes you get a little bit more inventive about what you bring to the table.
Of course, like when you're making a documentary or a narrative film and you have a limited budget, you can look at that as a hindrance, but ultimately that constraint provides you with, it's like the limitations push your creative boundaries, right? So you have to be creative in order to make it work, and that's where you allow for the magic to come in.
What kind of prep do you put into your interviews?
I had a learning curve with that. Like, I like to be very prepared, but I also think one thing that I've learned is you can be too prepared. If you've read every article and you've read every book, you're probably going to be fueled with a lot of great questions, and you're going to sound really smart to the listener, because they'll know that you'll be. It's like, when you said this, like, they'll be like, wow, that guy's prepared.
Yeah.
But I found that when you're too prepared and you already know the answer to every question that you're going to ask because they've answered it somewhere else, that it creates a little bit of a staleness in the conversation. It's like, oh, here's the part where he's going to say this, as opposed to purposely not doing as much research as you could so that you can be surprised. Because I think when you're surprised, there's a level of engagement when you're listening and you're like, oh, wow, really? Like, let's explore that. And then it keeps the energy and the intrigue and the interest level higher. So I try to read the books of the guests that I have on that have books. Sometimes that means skimming them or listening to most of it on audiobook, whatever. I can't read every single book. I read a couple articles, and then I spend time jotting out, not necessarily questions, but like topic headings or areas that I want to explore. And then, I have a little notebook just like you, and I put it out in front of me, and I never look at it. It feels weird to break eye contact or look down on it, but also, I think it's good to like put all of that in your consciousness and then forget it, and then just show up and be present. And I think if you've done the homework and you can be present and you're listening, then you're not going to struggle for what the next question is going to be or where to take the conversation.
I'm still like a neurotic person where I have to be over prepared for something. And I think that's one of those things that I can get better at, is just letting go and letting go of expectations of what something's going to be. Right. And just, I remember when we met, which was at Josh and Ryan's event, I think it was in San Francisco.
Right.
You said something about the way that people interview, and it's like, okay, great, cool, awesome, next question. And it's just always next question.
Yeah,
and
they have their list of questions and they're not paying attention. They're not present and they're not listening. They're just intent on getting through their list of questions. And as soon as they feel like the person's answered that, they're like, awesome. Then they go on to the next one. It's like, that's not a conversation. And that's a very one-sided, non-dynamic way of interacting with somebody.
Do you think a lot of people talk about our attention span, and that we have such a short attention span now? It's all about the 140 characters. Do you think that we're starting to get tired of that and sick of the sound bites? People just want to hear a real conversation in context.
Yeah, I think that's a big reason why podcasting has exploded. It's so refreshing because it's the polar opposite of the tweet, right? Like, what? You're going to talk to this guy for a couple hours? Like, that flies in the face of all other forms of media, from news, local and national news, to sitcoms or whatever kind of content that you're consuming. Everything has gotten shorter and shorter and shorter. And I think the podcast represents a pendulum swing backwards to something that's real, that has depth and emotion. And I think there's something in our spirit that yearns for that. It's like storytelling is as old as man, right? And podcasting is a way of storytelling in a way that allows it to breathe, you know. And I think there's also this yearning for authenticity, right? And you put these conversations up, like, they're imperfect, they're not edited, they're not drilled down to sound bites. And if you spend a couple hours with somebody, it's intimate, and that person is ultimately going to reveal who they are. There's something real about it. There's something honest about it that I think is also quite refreshing. And I think that's why people are connecting with the medium.
When we talked to Juliet Shore for Minimalism, she talked about that word authenticity. And it's funny because brands and advertising companies, they have hijacked that term, and they want their brand or their company to feel authentic. I think it is rare to find real authenticity, but when you find it, you know that it's there, and you can't fake it in the long run. You can fake it in a 30-second advertisement, right. But in a 2-hour conversation, I don't think you can fake authenticity.
Yeah, the word has definitely been co-opted and commodified, and I understand why, because people realize, like, oh, that is important, and that's what people respond to. But the minute that you commodify it, it's no longer what it is. Like, I feel like we need a new word now. It's like a bad word to say authentic. But true authenticity, like, transcends that, and there is a difference. And I think people are getting wiser and wiser and more discerning when it comes to bullshit. You know what I mean? Like, what young person watches an advertisement? You know, it's like our radar is so highly attuned to what's real and fake and what's honest that the attempt to manufacture authenticity in some kind of branding message, it just isn't going to fly, especially with young people. They see right through that. Like, you know when it's real.
Mm-hmm. Somebody might look at you and say, you've gotten to a point where you can just kind of sit back and relax, but you're still putting in some long hours. You're posting videos close to midnight. How do you find the balance between the podcast, the running, and the training, and the eating, and all of this?
It's hard. You know, I would say that on a day-to-day basis, I'm not a balanced person. You know, on a 6 month to 6 month basis, I am very balanced. Like, I make sure that all the important areas of my life are well attended to, but I work my ass off, man. And, you know, the podcast is a lot of work. If you want to do it, if you want to create something special, that's not ephemeral, you know, you have to, you know, this as somebody who's attentive to design and aesthetics and detail, like, it's not easy. Right? It requires a tremendous amount of my attention and time. And I have people now that are helping me, but it's still ultimately, it's me, it's my voice. Like, I try to write a really nice blog post that goes with each episode, and I want to design the page so it looks just so, and all that stuff requires a tremendous amount of attention. I travel all the time. I'm doing public speaking. I'm also trying to train. I'm a dad to 4 kids. Like, I'm juggling a lot of different things, and, you know, trying to step into the video stuff now is like, and I'm supposed to be writing books, and, like, you know, it's like, it's a lot, you know, and I know how to work hard. Like, I don't think I'm the most talented person out there, but I know how to, like, I do have a high pain tolerance, and I do know how to work hard, and I'm not afraid to, you know. But I think also a lot of that drive is informed by the fact that, like, I didn't figure out what I wanted to do with my life until I was in my mid 40s, you know, and I'm 51 now. How long am I going to be able to do? Like, I gotta make, you know, I gotta make hay now. So I'm highly motivated to make sure that I'm maximizing the opportunities that I'm blessed to, you know, have come across my radar these days. But I also, you know, have to take care of myself. It's like the adage, there's so much wellness in my life, I'm getting sick, you know, like, yeah, you know, I have to be careful because I have to be an ambassador and a living example of these ideas that I espouse.
I find the hardest thing to do is when you're pressing towards a deadline and making sure that all those things are in check, because there's sometimes I have to push everything else to the side to focus on this one thing, say for a month or 2 months. Like, this is all I can focus on, because once I get into something, I'm not going to be satisfied until it's finished and until I'm done.
I'm not a multitasker. I'm somebody who likes to go all in on something. So I hear you completely, man. And I used to feel like guilty about that. But I've changed my perspective on that. I think that's a gift, and I don't think we should feel bad about that. There's a guy called Brad Stolberg that who writes for Outside, and he wrote a book called Peak Performance, and we've had long conversations about this. And he said, I'm paraphrasing, but he says something like, look, the times in my life where I feel most alive are the times when I'm fully invested in something that I care about, and the passerby would say, well, you're out of balance. Like whether you're training for an ultra marathon or you're writing a book or you're editing a documentary where you just have to go into the cave and immerse yourself in a world. Our culture sort of tells us, well, you're out of whack with that. You gotta bring it back. But it's like, if that's your thing, man, let it fly, go for it. That pendulum will have to swing back, but it's okay to be out of balance when it's something that you're passionate about, as long as, there's not, people aren't getting sacrificed in the crosshairs of that. So I've learned to really embrace that. That's, people will say to me, you're channeling these alcoholic tendencies into your running or into these other things. And I think it's, in all fairness, I can't dismiss that. I'm like, yeah, there's probably some truth to that. So should I beat myself up about that? Or is that okay? I used to feel well, maybe I do have an alcoholic relationship with this or that, but these things are making my life better and they're helping other people. And I'm like, no, man, this is what I'm here to do. I'm going to feel good about it.
All right. I do bring up The Rock in every podcast because I don't know if you saw, I have The Rock right over your shoulder right there.
Oh, yeah. The original photo with the turtleneck.
Yeah. So getting The Rock on my podcast is my big goal. It's my stretch goal. It's my dream, right? Somebody that's really inspiring to me in terms of a ground up story. He's somebody who's just built it from nothing. If you were to give me advice on how I could get The Rock on my podcast, what would you say?
Well, let's just call him and ask him.
We could call him, yeah. I don't have his phone number.
That's the kind of thing where you put you put that intention out into the world and you let people know. Obviously, you're being public about it, and the way that something like that will happen will be in a way that you can't predict or imagine. It's not going to happen because you call his agent and his agent books it. It's never going to happen that way. It's going to happen because somebody who knows somebody who's his cousin, or you'll bump into him at the right time, or somebody will know somebody, and that's how it will eventually come to be.
All right, let's get into quick questions. Rich, where do you go when you're feeling doubt?
When I'm feeling doubt, the best thing for me to do is to go for a run or go for a swim. When I allow my unconscious mind to take center stage and I can just be present out on the trail at dawn or in the water, and I can free associate, that's when I'm able to be my most creative and problem solve without trying to problem solve. And that usually allows me to approach things that I have doubt around or confusion around with a greater sense of clarity.
Throughout all these years, what one skill have you leveraged in a way you think other people haven't?
Resilience.
What is the simplest advice that's the most important to follow?
Trust yourself. Follow your heart.
If you could only put 3 ingredients into your Vitamix blender, what would they be?
An amazing combination is kale and pineapple.
Really?
You wouldn't think that it would be good. It's actually delicious. So you could just do those 2 alone would be great. If you're going to add a third, maybe add some hemp seeds or chia seeds to that.
2 more questions. What one thing should my audience read, watch, or listen to before they go to bed?
Oh, before they go to bed?
Yeah, tonight.
There's a book called Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda that I've read 8 times, and it just blew my mind and has changed my life and will expand your consciousness and your horizons for what you imagine is possible.
And last question, where should people connect with you online?
Pretty easy to find on the internet. I'm at Rich Roll on Twitter and Instagram. YouTube is youtube.com/Rich Roll, but mostly Rich Roll Podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Cool, man. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you, Matt. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to The Ground Up Show. If you like this podcast, there's something you can do right now to help. Head on over to iTunes and leave a quick review. I print out every single one and I put them up on my mood board above my bed. Okay, that's not true, but I still notice and appreciate every one. For more on The Ground Up Show, including behind the scenes videos, check out groundupshow.com. Thanks for listening.